I guess I'll try this again. Alright, there we go. How's it going, everybody? Started making a video and then, yeah, anyway. Funny stuff. It's the evening time. I don't generally make videos in the evening. But notice I put on my funky sports jacket here. And this is a good friend of mine gave me this. It was his grandfather's who lived in Hawaii, and he got it tailor-made over there or something. He was a golfer, and it just cracked me up. I saw it when I was going through my stuff, and I thought I'd wear it. And appropriately over a Guns N' Roses shirt. It's kind of like that balance there. So anyway, it's the evening here. Just finished with some delicious homemade dinner my wife made, and it's hard to make home-cooked meals these days, you know, to actually make a crock pot full of chili or whatnot. It's like everything's so fast-paced and we're so rushed. And that's kind of what I'd like to talk about today. And forgive me if you've never watched my videos and you're coming here expecting some phenomenal explanation of whatever the title says. That's not going to happen. I'm probably just going to ramble on about, well, the current situation that I'm discussing here is originally I was going to make a video pertaining to the issues that we face as a world regarding the elites, the bankers, the J.P. Morgans and the Rothschilds of the world. And then I lose that oomph. There's only so much a person can say about it. There are 1,000 conspiracy documentaries out there with really deep, dark, scary music that'll tell you everything you need to know about the banking elite and how they're bloodshed and corrupting the world and everything's falling apart. And I don't deny any of that. But I also don't deny that if you obsess over it, then you have a hard time leading a normal life. As a family man, someone with children, generally I've found that it's healthier to try to lead a productive life when you're doing whatever you have to do to survive, in the sense that you have to have a job, you have to have a home, you have to be part of this society, whether you like it or not. And I'd like to step back for a minute in time to around 1998, when I read a book, Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. And that book really changed my mind about the way things were going in the world. I should say it set my mind on a rampage of trying to figure out where I've been lied to by the governments, by the elite, by the establishment. And so much in that book resonated. Whereas a lot of the stories about, you know, governments making deals with aliens, that kind of stuff, interdimensional stuff, hey, that's possible, I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate on it. However, I do believe that the UFO has suppressed UFO information, and I do believe that we have been continually suppressed as a working class society in order to benefit the very few and the rich. And if anyone still denies that that's actually going on, it just means that you're really not paying attention. Because if you look statistically back at history and look at what's happened to workers during uprisings, all through history, which is something I'm kind of rekindling and renewing myself with and reacquainting. I'm watching documentaries and reading information that I have read in decades past that I had to set aside because I hadn't found a way to assimilate it into a functioning, coherent strategy yet. And what I mean by a strategy is a way to get people to make a difference in this world. It's easy to sit and make a video where I say, hey, everybody needs to get together and you need to resist and stop paying taxes and fight back against the tyrannical government. But you're not going to. And even if you do, what good's it going to do? You're going to get mauled down. It's the way things go. Now, I'm not saying that there's nothing we can do. Go back in time to the Pinkertons, which were originally, Pinkerton Security was originally a group of men who were hired for corporations in order to suppress uprisings of workers who wanted better wages. Because simultaneously, the value of their dollar would be decreased, cost of living would go up, and their wages would be cut. And before there were unions, there were no worker rights. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the way unions work today, but in principle, the idea of a union is one where people are stronger together. I could say that the idea of a community is one where people are stronger together too. But we've seen what it leads to with too large of communities. Now, I could define myself as an anarchist in a way, in just the sense that I believe in self-governance and self-reliance of the people. I do not support a large government or corporatocracy. I do not support the attitude and the passivity that we have today towards just letting things go along as normal. But I also understand that people aren't able to get a full amount of information in about what's really going on behind closed doors. I can say, with all the information that I've researched and everything I've read, I'm still barely even scraping the surface of what's going on in this world. And I don't talk about the world issues too much. Not for lack of interest, not for lack of knowledge, but in many cases for lack of knowledge, and in some cases for lack of interest. But it's not that I'm not aware that these things have been going on. Imperialism, colonialism, these have been going on for centuries, and much longer. But the U.S., places like Belgium and Britain, and the type of colonies that they've created, the way that they've treated the natives, slaves, the way that we treated the Native Americans here on this land and wiped them out. The historical evidence to show that this country was based on wiping out an indigenous population, then importing slaves from another nation, and white slaves as well, which are never talked about. The Irish, many Irish came over here, and they were basically slave labor. The way that they were treated was as if they were blacks or colored or Mexican, and Mexicans have been exploited from the beginning. And all the people who live in America comfortably, who complain about the Mexicans in California, if you don't like it, then you shouldn't be living in a territory which was originally Mexico. And now, the U.S. basically took over that area, and the Mexicans were supposedly allowed to live peacefully still upon that land, but things have gotten pretty nasty over the last century or so. It seems that we've forgotten our past. We've forgotten that we as people deserve to be treated with respect by our employers as well as our elected officials. It seems that we've decided to put the responsibility into the hands of others to govern us rather than electing people that represent us. I'd like to go back in history and say that we have a great history in this country. But weren't the Founding Fathers just as corrupt as we are today? Didn't they own slaves, and didn't they sign documents and get themselves into trouble? It didn't really become very apparent until the age of, I was going to say the age of print, although the printing press has been around since Gutenberg. It's not about that. It's about when press, as in media, became very popular. By the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, it was chaos in the working class. And the presidents that were elected were not for the people. Many of them, Roosevelt, Hayes, these people who made these interesting decisions for vested interests. You could go back and probably find something that's wrong with every president through history. But you know what? It's not about that. Because we look at a president as if they're a flawless thing. Like they're supposed to be this perfect character. But show me the example to go by, and maybe I'll understand. Humans are flawed by nature. We are flawed because we expect to be perfect. Because we cannot accept our natural order, our nature. We don't even know what our nature is. We're not as smart as we think. I saw an interesting clip earlier of a chimp. This kind of blew my mind. It's an older video. It was a chimp who was shown a computer screen with several numbers, like 1 through 9. And he was supposed to hit them in order of 1 through 9. And he could do it rather easily to get a treat, a peanut. Then they started putting the numbers up for a split second and then blocking them out with white backgrounds. And he still was able to memorize it. Point being, the chimps were actually better at it than the humans. They knew how to memorize the entire pattern. How exactly that happened, how the chimps do that, we don't know. Perhaps they have a photographic memory or something of the sort. Their brains work differently, but the point is that they were better at something that humans pride ourselves on being intelligent because we can do, which is solve puzzles and remember things and have a memory. We are still young, you know. And I was thinking earlier, we're still young in the technology age, and we haven't grown up enough to use the toys that we have. It's as if we're 5-year-olds that have been given lasers and monster trucks, and you know, we're using them irresponsibly, but once we grow into them, hopefully we'll know how to do things properly with all the mistakes that we make in the meantime. I think that sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit as humans and say, hey, we can do great things. But when you look around and see all the greed and destruction and death and corporate monstrous greed, you see that it's a disease. It's something that afflicts everyone who gets into that circle of influence. You might look into the Stanford experiments, the Stanford prison experiments, where they took college kids and put some of them in as guards, prison guards, and some of them as prisoners. And within like 3 or 4 days, I think, they had to shut the experiment down because they were actually abusing the prisoners. And they had fallen into these roles. And some of these prisoners, the quote prisoners, had long-lasting trauma after this. And it really goes to show that, you know, even a stable college, well, I'm not going to say all college kids are stable, but you know what I mean. That the average person who doesn't have any real menacing behaviors or angst towards others can turn into a son of a bitch. And I can't even imagine what it's like to be a politician going in to change things and then seeing that once you get there, there's no point in even trying. That you either fall in line with what they're doing, or you're an outcast, and there is enough propaganda and bad information they could put out about people that you can think of the government as somewhat like a church of Scientology. They want to get you to join to help them out, to make them look good, but the minute that you try to speak out against them, they're going to try to tear you down and sue your ass. That's how the church works there, but that's also how the government works, and I guess maybe, you know, of course it's not just the U.S. government, but U.S. policy has caused so much conflict worldwide. It goes beyond just messing around in the Middle East. It goes beyond just, you know, starting wars or coups. We have taken out so many leaders. We have had so many coups to remove people from power who were trying to establish a democratic society within their country. There are statistical socialist programs in places like Grenada that were doing wonder for their citizens until the U.S. decided that they wanted to get involved. And it's shameful as a citizen that I have to be part of that. That it's almost sad when I hear people say that Americans are this way or that way. We're not any way. We're just people. And there are fucking lazy sons of bitches out there who don't give a damn about you or I. And there are a lot of really caring people who do care. And this is consistent throughout the world. They've made us enemies with each other. They've made us fight over people like Trump or Clinton, or whether Russia or the Middle East are going to start a war, or whether or not our policies are good on this or that, or we should help people more or less. They've kept us fighting over things that should be human rights. That truly, with the way that we're set up in this country, there should be more than enough tax money to pay for an adequate military as well as help its citizens, if they're going to collect the amount that they do. But it's wasted. It's frivolous. And how do we know that? Because we see it lining the pockets of the people who make the decisions. So what do we do about it? You know, in the 1800s, the anarchist movement kind of took hold, and eventually a bunch of anarchists in Europe, they actually went and snuffed out a bunch of leaders, prime ministers, things like that. You know, obviously today it's a little more difficult for people to organize on the same page, because some people believe in violent resistance and others believe in passive resistance. I'd like to say that both of them end up leading back to the same problems we have. What we need is consistent resistance, not passive or violent. This means that we have to consistently remind ourselves of what's really going on in the world. Remember that we're just human, you know? We're just individuals. I'm just a guy sitting in the office in the back of my garage talking on a video about how I feel about the world. Does that mean that I even understand what's truly going on out there? Of course not. But the picture that I've developed in my head about how the way the world works has allowed me to see somewhat how others see the world. And there are some people out there who see nothing but the negatives. I don't sit and dwell on the problems of the world because it's not healthy, because it's damaging to my psyche. And I don't want to cause any type of conflict within my brain where I end up going completely insane, batshit crazy, worrying about, you know, what's going on next. Is the CIA tapping our phones? You know, yeah, sure, all of this is going on, but you still have to live your life. If you have kids, you might understand where I'm coming from better than if you don't. And I don't mean that that's better or worse. Just in the sense that you have to live a somewhat normal life when you have children. You want to teach them. You want them to grow up in a good world. Therefore, you want to have a good viewpoint of the world. If you're constantly sitting around telling your kids, oh yeah, you know, terrorists are out there and yeah, the world's dangerous, then they're going to grow up damaged, thinking that the world is scary. And we'll end up consistently raising more and more children who think that everyone's out to get them. Whereas if you teach kids that there are dangerous people, but generally these are the characteristics to look out for, and you're going to have to learn for yourself, that might be a better approach. You know, a few more kids might be in danger if they're not scared of everyone, but, you know, kids are scared of everyone, then that's kind of, I don't know, it kind of goes against what a society should be. We're living too scared. We're afraid. We lock our doors at night because we're afraid of criminals. Depending on where you live, that may or may not be the best plan of action. You know, if you live in the country, generally they don't lock their doors. But if you live in the inner city, you probably lock your doors every time you even go get your paper. And that's just how it is. Same with cars. And that is a good example of how people have different perspectives on life and different viewpoints about whether the world is dangerous or not. So the world itself, as a whole, no, it's not dangerous. Most people just want to live their lives. There's a small faction, and the 1% would be them. I'm not talking about generally the 1% that's rich, but a majority of them have very influential power and lobbying interests. Even the people who have a lot of money but consider themselves liberal-minded can easily just say, hey buddy, if you can sway this my way, it'd be great, but I don't want to know what you're doing. Out of sight, out of mind. Then your values aren't compromised. You don't have to know that a person is out there being, you know, sniping a leader or taking out an entire country or starting a war over something that you may profit from. And I would like to think that these problems can be dealt with rationally, that we would be able to sit down and talk these things out with the elite, the rich. But it seems there's an impasse. We've tried for hundreds of years. The people who have more always want those who have less to bow down to them. They think they're superior. They truly think that they're the chosen ones. And it even gets further complicated when we get into religion, such as the Zionists. The Zionists, and I'm not talking about the Jews, but the Zionists are a small portion that believe that they are entitled to land based on their beliefs and their religion. And we hear this all the time. Everybody wants Temple Mount. Everybody wants this location, that location, the birthplace of this person, you know, the death of that person. these are causing actual physical conflicts in which millions of people have died over the centuries. And yet still, we perpetuate these religious beliefs. And it's hard because we can't step in and say, well, you need to abolish religion. I've heard that plenty of times. That's not going to work. You can't just walk in and say we need to abolish religion. I've even had arguments with people who say that we should make a religion illegal. And I say that denies the right to freedom of speech. It's completely preposterous. It's exactly like Trump's plan to deport Muslims. In its right, that is irrational fear. With that many Muslims in this country, why aren't there more terrorist attacks? See, I'm not scared of terrorism. It's not a fear of mine. Terrorism has been used as a playing card for a couple decades now, since 9/11, as a way to get people to go along with just about anything, any invasion, any war, whatever we consider to be legitimate. I remember from day one we went into Iraq when they said that first we were looking for bin Laden, and then they were like, well, there's no bin Laden, we're looking for weapons of mass destruction. And then the UN declares that there's no weapons of mass destruction. Then it's Operation Iraqi Freedom. And the American people fucking go along with it. I hear people reciting these things during that time, over and over. Well, we're there to give them democracy. Well, look at where they're at now. You tell me why we went into Iraq. Many different reasons, I'm sure. But they do have a lot of oil, of course. But that's not a reason. But, then again, next door we have Afghanistan. And a lot of people are like, why were we in Afghanistan? Well, we were hunting bin Laden, of course. Maybe so. But Afghanistan produces 90% of the world's opium supply now. And before, I believe they were only 5 to 10%. And you can see pictures online of American troops guarding opium poppy fields. Now, this is a conflict of interest due to the fact that we need them for American pharmaceuticals. Then we have those very opiates killing people. It's a very complicated issue. But it's always about money. That's all that matters. It's always about money. We never go to war unless it's either a natural resource or a strategic location. And that seems to be why we have bases in about 150 countries, I believe. And those bases, there are over 800 American military bases. From what last time I looked, 865, which could be upwards of more like 1,000. And I'd like to ask any American out there who thinks that, the rest of the world should respect us, to know that, how would you feel if there were Iraqi military bases in your country, here, and a variety of other countries' militaries here? I mean, it's very difficult for people to see how long the U.S. really hasn't been an imperial disaster. And all we can do now is realize that we have the technology to make a difference. That's as much as I can say about it, because I can't organize or orchestrate anything. It's not my place. And we know that any group that gets too organized gets quashed. So I implore you to investigate as an individual all the things that we have done, not just as a nation, but as a Western society. Not a democracy. It's a corporatocracy. We know that. Maybe one day the anarchy will reign supreme again. Who knows? It's hard to say. This world's full of surprises, but I'd like to say that anytime a group gets too organized, they become infiltrated. Okay? The CIA has infiltrated so many groups. They even had people in sewing circles after 9/11, seeing if there were any people speaking against the government. These people are everywhere. They listen to everything. We know we're being recorded. We know we're being watched. We know that anytime we make a video and put our necks on the line, or even talk about anything like I am here, it gets noticed. Even by an algorithm of a computer. It doesn't matter. Every word we say now is scanned, so if we try to organize, we will be infiltrated. So, as individuals, we need to take it into our own hands to resist. Not passive resistance or violent resistance, but consistent resistance. Peace, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later. That's my closing song.